Ela told us Yaakov. What are the Chronicles of Yaakov? Yosef ben Shvaz Shana. Yosef, at the age of 17, I had learned this with you last class I gave, which was 2 days ago. He was shepherding his brothers with the sheep. Gunar is bnei Bilo, bnei Zilpa neshei Oviv. He was the lead shepherd, and he had befriended the children of Zilpa and Bila, which were the maidservants, the wives of his father. Yovi Yosef is the bosom roy Elavim. And he would bring the critical information about his brothers to the father. Just want to go on this Rashi here. Ela told us Yosef. So Rashi says, Ela shel told us Yaakov. These are the chronicles of Yaakov. Ela Yushiveim, V'Gulguleim, Achimol L'Chlal Yishuv. This with all the evolutions and evolvements until they came finally to settle. What were they? Sibri Shono Yosef and Shvasi Shono. Yosef was 17 years old. As a result of Yosef, the ultimate chronicles evolved that we went to Egypt. That's a simple understanding. That all that followed from this moment forward, which is the most vital information of the Jewish people, was a result of what happened now with Yosef when he was 17 years old, which caused the strife and the tension between the brothers, the animosity, which ultimately led to he should be sold, and whatever follows. Medrash Agoda Doresh. The Midrash explains, Tolo HaKosef Toldos Yaakov Yosef, Mikam Dvorim, that the Chronicles of Yaakov were reflective of Yosef, or Yosef was reflective of Yaakov. Achas. Shekol Atzmo Yaakov lo avad el Lovon el berochel. Firstly, Yaakov, all that had taken place in the home of Lavan, the wife that he had gone there to marry, was Rachel. Which was the mother of Yosef. Yosef's facial features were exactly like his father's. Yosef looked exactly like Yaakov. As we'll see in a moment, that the Zivi Kunim, when it speaks about he was a Ben Zikunim, which literally means he was born to in his old age, also is alluding that Zivi Kunim, that the radiance of his face, the facial features, not only facial features, but there was a certain degree of radiance, presence of Yosef was identical to his father. Yosef. Whatever Yaakov experienced in his life repeated itself with Yosef, as we'll explain. Zenistam v'zenistam. Yaakov was hated by his brother. Yosef was hated by his brothers. As Esau wanted to kill Yaakov, his brothers wanted to kill him. As a result of this strife, so this is the meaning. Ela told us Yaakov. All that had transpired with Yaakov repeated itself with Yosef. Now, this is very important. Initially, Yaakov married Rachel because ultimately there had to be a Yosef. Rachel initially was meant to be the primary, and she was the first matriarch, although she was the second matriarch in terms marriage-wise, but she was the primary matriarch. Yaakov understood that when he had seen her, that she is truly his soulmate. And that's the reason why after he kissed her, he cried, because he realized, although she was his soulmate and she was the matriarch, she would not be buried with him. but she was not. Leah was buried alongside Yaakov in the Marasa Machpelah, the tomb Machpelah. He didn't understand why. That was not meant to be, but we find that Rachel Mevakal Boneo, the reason why she was married in Beis Lechem, on the road, alongside the road, which today was Kever Rachel, so it's ultimately when the Jews are going to go into exile after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, Rachel will come out of her grave and she will beseech and supplicate Hashem when we're going to exile, and God says to Rachel, your children will return to their boundaries. After so many years, they're coming back. But it was important that she should be buried there, so when they pass by her grave, she should come out and supplicate Hashem on behalf of the Jewish people. But it's interesting. It says, Rachel mevak el boneho. Rachel beseeched Hashem for her children. Her children are only Yosef and Binyamin. Only 3 of the tribes were her children. The rest of the tribes were not her children. But yet it's referred to Rachel mevak el boneho. So we had said something interesting, or I'd said something interesting just recently, that we find that when Lavan initially had misled Yaakov, allowing him to believe that the woman under the chuppah was Rachel, but it was Leah, Rachel went and she had given the code words, which Yaakov had given to her. He had shared these code words with Leah. Why? Because under the chuppah, Yaakov understood that Lavan, as careful as you are, you cannot trust a man. So he had given us certain words. What were the words? Chalo, the tithing of the bread. Nida, the laws of family purity. And Hadlokas Neiros, lighting of the candles. Those were the code words. And when Yaakov under the chuppah would ask for those code words, if the woman under the chuppah would not respond, he would know immediately that this is not Rachel, it's someone else. And Rachel understood if that would happen, there'd be a serious ramification consequences. Her sister would be embarrassed and disgraced. So she went and she shared the code words with her sister. So when Yaakov asked for the code words, Leah responded. And he believed that this was Rachel he was marrying. Only in the morning, as the Torah says, Vayashkim baboker, he awoke in the morning and he realized it's Leah. It's not Rachel, meaning until that moment, he had thought this was Rachel. Because the code words were shared with him by Rachel giving the code words. So you could say that the reason why Leah actually married Yaakov was because of Rachel. That's why Leah married Yaakov. So you could say Rachel mevakal boneo. She is the cause that there was a Jewish people. 6 of the tribes come from Leah. And if he wouldn't have married Leah, there wouldn't have been a Jewish people. So therefore, although biologically she didn't mother them, but nevertheless, she is the cause of that there's a Jewish people by sharing those code words with her brother, with her sister. It's Rachel mevakal boneo. We find that Rachel was barren. The Torah tells us, Vayiskar Hashem es Rachel. He remembered her. So Rashi says, what does it mean he remembered her? And this is what she conceived. He remembered her that she gave over the code words. So in the schus that he read for giving over the code words, therefore she conceived. And that's when Yosef was born, as a result of that merit that she'd given over the code words. However, I've mentioned that Binyamin, on the Choshen, on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, he wore breastplate, and there are 12 stones on the breastplate. Each stone represented a tribe. And the name of this tribe was etched into that stone. Now, the stone of Binyamin was known as the Yoshpe stone. What is the meaning of Yoshpe? It's conjunction Yeshpeh. Binyamin knew that his brothers had sold Yosef. Yaakov had believed that he was mauled and devoured by a beast. Binyamin did not divulge it. He did not share this with his father, and he kept silent. Meaning, yesh peh, he had the ability to speak, but he did not speak. He remained silent. That's why his stone is called the Yoshpe stone, yesh peh. Although he has the ability, he suppressed it, he did not speak. Where did he assume this characteristic of silence? From his mother. That Rochel, she had given the code words to her sister, and she remained silent. And that's why Yaakov married Leah. Otherwise, she wouldn't have married Leah. So that characteristic of silence, suppression of silence, even at the most trying moment, to have that inner strength to do this, he inherited this from his mother. That's a simple understanding. There's a question. We find that when Rachel was barren, and the Torah tells us a story that Reuven went and he had gathered mandrakes from the field because his mother hadn't conceived for a while. This would actually make her more fertile that she should conceive. And Rachel goes to her sister Leah and says, could you give me the mandrakes that your son had just brought home? So Leah says to Rachel, seems to be almost heartlessly, with cruelty, you nearly took my husband, and now you're taking the mandrakes. That's what you're doing. I mean, if not for Rachel, Leah wouldn't have married Yaakov. She already has 6 children. And she says, you nearly took my husband, and now you want to take the mandrakes. But don't you understand, the only reason why he's your husband is because of Rachel. Because he wouldn't have given those code words, he would not be your husband. What's going on? What was going on in Leah's mind? What did she believe? So if you take a look at the Midrash Tanchuma, during the 7 years of courtship that Yaakov had courted Rachel, he sent her gifts continuously, like a chosen sends to his kala, a groom sends to his fiancée before the marriage, send her gifts. The gifts were sent to Rachel. Lavan was such an underhanded, deceptive, dishonest person. He would take those gifts and he would take them and not give them to Rachel, and he would give them to Leah, allowing Leah to believe that her fiance was sending her these gifts. So all those years she was believing that Yaakov was courting her, not courting Rachel. That's what she believed. So finally, when she was under the chuppah, she believed that now that 7 years of courtship is going to be consummated. That's what she believed. She didn't understand, and Rachel had given her those words, not understanding, because otherwise the game is up. Her father's game's up. She didn't understand it. She believed that being under the chuppah, this was her chosan, who was going to consummate the 7 years of courtship. It was all the years she was receiving the gifts from Yaakov. But she didn't understand that Lavan was diverting them and giving it to her. But she remained silent. Why did she remain silent? So Medrash says, because if she wouldn't have given those gifts, Yaakov wouldn't have married Leah. And if he wouldn't have married Leah, there would have been this fracas, this explosion with Lavan. Lavan wouldn't have given either of his daughters to Yaakov. He would have been denied not only Leah, he would have denied Rachel. That's what would have been the outcome. Rachel, understanding that, he says, if that's the case, there's not going to be any tribes. There's not going to be a Jewish people. I'm willing to give up the Jewish people. You'd say, well, if I can't have it, no one's having it. No. If she's going to be found out there's no Jewish people, if that's the case, I remain silent. And she remained silent. So remaining silent was the cause that there was a Jewish people. Because she could have taken it very personal and say, if that's the case, if I can't be the matriarch, Leah's not going to be the matriarch. She didn't say that. She said, if I can't be the matriarch, better Leah should be the matriarch and it should be a Jewish people. So why is there a Jewish people? Because of the silence of Rachel. So we speak of Rachel mevakel baneo. Rachel is supplicating Hashem for his children when they're going to exile. Those tribes are really her children. Because if not for Rachel, there would not be a Jewish people. Because Lavan wouldn't have given either of his daughters to Yaakov if Yaakov would have known at that moment that this was not Rachel. So who is Yosef? Yosef himself is Zivi Kunin Shaloviv. He's the primary son, as Rachel was the primary wife. And Klal Yisrael was meant to come from her. Yosef himself was the equivalent, had all the qualities of his father. Facially, he looked like him. We'll see in a moment. All the experience he experienced. Yaakov's brother hated him. Yaakov's brother wanted to kill him. All the challenges of Yaakov to be able to develop and become Yaakov, Yosef experienced the same challenges because his potential was similar, almost identical to his father's, because he was meant to be the successor of his father. As we said, that the patriarch of Golus, of exile, is Yaakov. That's why he enacted and legislated harvest, night, the nighttime tefillah. Night is equivalent of exile, of Golus. The only son that could survive exile without a support system was Yosef. He was in Egypt all by himself. And despite all the challenges, at the end of the day, he's Yosef HaTzadik. The only one of the tribes that are identified as Tzadik is the only one is Yosef. The other brothers did not have the challenges of Yosef because he had the ability, the spiritual potential of what? Of his father. And that's what the Torah is telling us. Stop for a moment. We'd mentioned in the Medrash that Yosef was meant to have 12 sons, 12 tribes. As his father had 12 sons, he was meant to father 12 sons. We find that Yosef's children, Ephraim and Manasseh, although the grandchildren of Yaakov, they assumed the status of tribes. When he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, he says, Ruvain, Ephraim, Manasseh, Kruvim, Shimon, Eli. He says, Ephraim and Manasseh, although they're my grandchildren, they have the same status as what? As Reuven and Shimon. But why? Because the answer is, Yosef was an extension of his father. Yosef was the Lehova. Yaakov is the Aish. Yaakov is the fire. Who's the flame? The flame extends from a fire. He was an extension of his father. He suppressed his father in certain areas, as we said. He could only contend with Esav only because Yosef was born. Yosef was fire, but he was the flame. He was the flame of that fire. As a result of that, he looked like his father. He had 12 sons like his father. The challenges he was meant to have, the challenges he experienced, to be able to achieve his potential, he had to meet those similar challenges. Because other than going through those experiences, he wouldn't have achieved to be who he was meant to be. Rabbeinu Bachio cites the Zohar that the Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne, has 4 sides to it. Each one of the pillars or the legs of the Kisei HaKavod, one is Avram, one's Yitzchak, one's Yaakov. The 4th leg is Yosef. Yosef is the 4th. And he explains, ultimately, David was the 4th leg. David Melchizedek Chai V'Kayim. David is the 4th leg of the heavenly throne, whatever it means, a Kabbalistic understanding. But until David came into existence, who was the 4th support of the heavenly throne? It was Yosef. Because Yosef was Yaakov, an extension of Yaakov. David had another level of representation. So till David came into being, his levels of achievement, Yosef was temporary there. Now we have the 4th, because it's another level of representation. David Melech Show, that's the royalty, that's the Melech Mashiach. He's the one that ultimately will declare God to being the sole, supreme being who created, and the world will accept and embrace monotheism at the most advanced level, and all evil will come to an end at that time. Yaakov is the patriarch of Golus. None of the patriarchs experienced Golus the way Yaakov did. He fled from his father's home. He spent 14 years in Beis Medrash Shel Aver, spent 22 years 20 years by Lavan, 22 years on the way back. Then he went into Egypt, and he passed away in Egypt. And he had to be brought back. That's Yaakov. Yaakov is the Av of Golus. And the only reason why we're able to survive Golus is because we're Bnei Yisrael. Yisrael represents that he's able to contend with all the challenges of man and all the challenges of spirituality. He defeated the angel of Esav, and he survived Lavan and Esav. Therefore, Bnei Yisrael. Okay? Whenever we speak about the Jewish people in the context of our physical destiny, our physicality, we're Bnei Yaakov. But the survival and the destiny of the Jewish people within the spiritual realm will be Yisrael. Yisrael represents the spirituality of the Jewish people. So Yaakov is the patriarch of Golus. If Rachel was the primary patriarch, as we originally mentioned, that's why when he met her first, he kissed her and he cried because he recognized she was the matriarch, the primary matriarch. And he realized she wasn't going to be buried. And that's why he cried. He didn't understand why. Because he didn't realize there was going to be another matriarch and other women who were going to be the mothers of his children. He didn't understand that. But who is Rachel? Rachel is the matriarch who guarantees the return of the Jewish people from Golus. As Yaakov is the Av, is the patriarch of Golus, Rachel is the matriarch, which is really the adjunct to her husband, the guarantee that they survived the Golus. If Hashem listens to our supplications, we could have assimilated in both. We could have totally disappeared. But the reason why we came, due to our supplications, what did Hashem say? The children are coming back. They're coming back due to the supplications of Rachel. So Rachel, Yaakov is Golus, survival of Golus, but the ultimate, what brings them back are the supplications of Rachel, being the primary matriarch, who's his true spiritual counterpart of Yaakov. Yosef, we only were able to survive Egypt because Yosef had prepared for that lengthy exile of 210 years. Otherwise, we couldn't have survived it.
Rabbi, how do we...
When Yaakov came to Haran, it says he ran, when he heard Yaakov, he ran towards him, he hugged him, he embraced him, he kissed him. So Rashi says, because he remembered the wealth that Eliezer had brought, so he thought Yaakov, the sons, definitely come with such wealth. So he says, although I don't see wealth, maybe he has on his body, he's carrying, he has wealth on his body. He's not, then he kisses him, maybe he has diamonds in his mouth. And he realized he's coming totally impoverished. And he tells him the story about Eliphaz, that Eliphaz was sent to kill him, and he gave up his wealth. Realize Lavan was the equivalent of Esav, less. But just as Lavan, Esav was the counterbalance to Yaakov and the antagonist of Yaakov to destroy him, Lavan, was no friend of Yaakov's. When he left, what did he wanted to kill Yaakov? And when we bring the Bikurim, the Kriyas Bikurim, what do we say? Arami Ovid Ovid. Arami Ovid, the Aramean wanted to destroy our father. He was going to kill Yaakov. Lavan believed that Yaakov would not survive spiritually. He'd be compromised totally. In every sense of the word, in Kemach Torah. Even the wealth that he created, he believed after when Yaakov said, all that I have is mine, the children my children, and the wealth is my wealth, because although you cheated me 100 times, rightfully, legally, it's mine. So what was Lavan's answer to Yaakov? Bonecha bonai, v'tzon chotzoni. Your children are my children, your wealth is my wealth. What are you talking about? We made a deal. In Lavan's eyes, deal means nothing. Lavan wanted to destroy Yaakov. If he would have fled, he would have destroyed him in Chorah, never to come back. That's Lavan. Lavan understanding what Yaakov was, that he is the heir apparent of his father. He wants to undermine the potential of Klal Yisrael. What does he do? So if Rachel is the primary matriarch, who's Yaakov's meant to marry, what does he do? You marry Leah. Leah that was meant for Esav, you marry her. That's going to be your wife. You're not going to produce a Klal Yisrael from Leah. That's what he believed. But then afterwards, his greed was so overwhelming. Lavan, he says, I'll work another 7 years. He never believed that he'd work another 7 years for Rachel. And he agreed to give him Rachel, but Rachel was the second wife. Became secondary. So even though ultimately Rachel did marry Yaakov, who's the primary matriarch who he wanted, but he already fouled up the order. It's not going to work out as it was meant to work out. If Rachel would have been the first wife, then Klal Yisrael would have evolved to be at that ultimate level. Initially, he thought there wouldn't be a Rachel. Rachel would not marry Yaakov. But his greed that he'd work another 7 years allowed. But now she's coming as in second place, not first place. So because Lavan himself was the antagonist, as Yosef was at a lesser level, therefore he would not allow Rachel should be the first wife. She was only the second wife. But even though she was the second wife, she was the primary matriarch, because even the children of Leah recognized Rachel as the primary matriarch. We read at the beginning of Shmos that Yocheved and Miriam were the midwives, oversaw all the birthing of the Jewish children in Egypt. Shifra and Pua, they were the midwives. And Paro summons them, and he says to them that if it's a boy, a male, you should kill the child on the birth stool. If it's a girl, allow her to live. They did not heed the words of the king of Egypt, and they did not kill the male children. And not only did not kill them, they fed them, they cleaned them, okay? But the Maral cites the Midrash, unbelievable Midrash, that when it says he summed them in originally, what did he want? Shifra and Pua, Miriam and Yocheved, he wanted to have sexual relations with them. And they turned him down. He's the king of Egypt. They would not at all listen to him. So the Maral, what's this all about? Wanting to have sexual relations? What does that have to do with killing the male children? There's a Maral in Vur Hashem. So he writes that based on the Pasuk in Navi, and Tosas in Kedushin cites this Pasuk, that when a man cohabits with a woman, that act of intimacy causes the woman to be receptive and be influenced by the position of the husband. That's bo'layach osoyach. Though the person who cohabits with, he will make you. He becomes the primary impact in your life, in the woman's life. So Paro understood that they're going to resist his request to kill the male children. So by having sexual relations with them, he will have the upper hand, and they will be receptive to his suggestion. They turned him down. So the Maral of Prague asks, wait, Paro understood this? Paro didn't understand this. Now, very often we had discussed that every nation has an archangel. And the archangel represents whatever that nation is meant to be. So if Esav is the antagonist of the Jewish people, who is the one who fought with Yaakov? That angel that was Samach Mem. That's the angel that fought with Yaakov, and Yaakov had the upper hand. He was victorious in that fight. Meaning, whatever that nation is, the way it manifests itself in the physical, what the driving force or the direction is based on that archangel. So very often there'll be decisions made, or that nation will come upon certain approaches. It's due to the archangel. It's the representation of the spirituality of that nation. That's why the nation acts and succeeds in certain contexts. The reason why Paro tried to seduce them, he didn't know, because if I seduce you, therefore, he had a desire for them. He didn't understand how this would manifest itself. But ultimately, this was the purpose, because if he would have sexual relations with them, he would have the upper hand, and they would be receptive to his influence. But not that he understood this. This had to do with the representation of Egypt, the archangel directing him, and that's why he was attracted. That's the understanding. Lavan himself, in terms of what he represented, did he understand primary, not primary, although he understood plenty, as Yosef understood. Yosef hated Yaakov. Why? Because he'd taken the birthright from him. But they were fighting in the womb already, the two of them. One represents good, one represents evil. It's just a sense. You are something, you rub me the wrong way. We cannot coexist. Why? You may attribute it to A through Z, but that's not the reason. The reason is because I am this and you're that. And we're opposites. And because we're opposites, we cannot coexist. Lavan is evil. Whatever it has to be done, Yaakov will not survive to have the upper hand. If Rachel will allow that to happen, being the primary matriarch and being the first wife, that means Yaakov will succeed to establish the Jewish people at the most advanced level. He's going to foul that up. He's not going to let it happen. Leah is the first one to marry. He's not going to get what he thinks he's getting. Not that he understood all the ramifications of that. So Leah, the first seed of Yaakov went into Leah, not into Rachel. And he thought he succeeded. Then he says, why did you cheat me? I'll work another 7 years. So even though he agreed to Rachel, but nevertheless, it wasn't in the order that it was meant to be in Lavan's mind. Therefore, now Rachel is secondary. Be secondary, he already undermined and compromised the destiny of the Jewish people. That's what he believed. And he believed in not leaving. Yaakov fled, and he wanted to kill him. Hashem intervenes, doesn't allow it. It's going to happen, regardless. But this is how things evolve. And Rachel being the primary, as I said, therefore she's buried on the way. Because just as Yaakov is the Av of Golus, she is his spiritual mate to guarantee that Jews come back from that exile. That's the linkage. She's the adjunct to Yaakov. Leah is buried next to Yaakov in the Mars Machpelah, not Leah, not Rachel. Because that's not Rachel's function. Rachel's function is to guarantee the survival of the Jewish people. As Yosef was to guarantee the survival of the Jewish people. Yosef was the Av of Golus. Only he could contend with all the challenges of Egypt alone to establish that location for the Jews to be able to leave after 210 years.